Hey guys, I'm Firefly, and in this video we're going to be working on a side character named Eon. So as you can see, I already have his pose sketched out in black, and I'm just going over it with some basic anatomy to kind of fix in the pose to make it more realistic. You'll see that I added a hat to this layer. That is because before I even started drawing him, I just always imagined him wearing a hat as a representation of himself, so I made sure to make sure it's in the sketch just to keep it in mind, especially when thinking about the pose I wanted him to be in. So you'll see I'm trying a few different ways to draw it on his head. I've looked up a few references, but I haven't quite gotten the hang of it or even really know what I want it to look like quite yet. So in this initial sketch, you'll see I'm adding a bandana and a pair of glasses to his face. This is really to hide his features, which the bandana is not that big of a deal because most hunters in my world do have them just because of what they do for a living. However, you'll see later that I absolutely hate the glasses, so I changed them to something else. Once I have the hourglass drawn in his hand, I position it to where I want it and then attach it to his body with the fresh arm where the anatomy is a little bit better, but it still needs some work, which I do end up fixing by the end of this video. So after that, I started on his clothes with armor plates that I wanted for his cape, because when I have characters with capes, I generally prefer something on their shoulders. Next, I'm going to add a belt to his design. Since he is a hunter, they generally do have like weapons or something on their belt. It also gives me a point of reference when doing the line art, so that way I have like a complete shape, since it is generally like a rectangular shape, and I can build off of that while working on other sections. So at this point I do add sleeves, but I don't really like them, so I go back to the hand, going over the sketch. So I'm adding some gloves and actually working on those fingers. This one you can see is not working, so I'm redoing that real quick, which is much better. And when I do the line art, also editing and never stop fixing things. So in addition to the gloves, I also add arm guards. This is just to keep with having armor on him, since he does have it on his shoulders already. And then I add in some rough sleeves, which I also edit later. So after a few minor changes, particularly with the bandana, I move on to his boots. So most of my hunters wear boots just because of their line of work, but for him, I do give him armor across his toes just to go with the armor that I've already have in other places, because I'd rather not have just like some random piece of armor, because that wouldn't make much sense. I also make his cape longer, and then I'm going to edit his anatomy just a tiny bit, fixing the arm, but the sleeves I do edit so they'll look a bit better and work with his anatomy a bit more. After that, I bring in Corbin and I compare my character to his anatomy and style just to make sure they are consistent, because this character is a little bit taller than Corbin, so it was important to make sure that when I draw them together, their proportions make sense with each other. Now that the sketch is finished and all those edits are made, we can start on the line art. So you can see I'm picking to start with the hand. That is because the hand with the glove and the arm guard kind of makes it a one piece, and also because it's closer to the foreground of this picture, it's easier to build off of if I'm doing other sections. And as you can see, while I'm doing the line art, I'm still making changes to the sketch and my drawing just to make sure that it is the best it can be. So for this particular drawing, I didn't decide what I wanted the pendant on his hat to look like beforehand or in the sketching stage. I kind of had that basic shape that was based off of the helm of a ship, since hunters do sail a lot, especially some characters that show up later in the story. But when drawing it, I decided it looked closer to a gear, which works anyway since he does have that overall theme of the hourglass. So I felt like it matched better and just went with it. This is also when I started to hate the shades I put on him, and I do end up changing those, which I'll talk about when I get to that point. But I left them for now because I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do instead, whether it be to design some sort of mask or to just draw his eyes. At this point, I'm also doing quite a bit of changes for the sleeves because they just weren't shaped right, and so I need them fixed a lot better. But after that, I go into the hourglass, which is going to be a drawing on in itself. so this is not attached to the layer with the rest of my line art. The hardest part of this was probably getting it symmetrical, especially in that middle portion. It did take a bit of time to do, but eventually I got it, and I actually do change it a little bit when I start the coloring stage. You also see that I make the layer disappear for a moment. That's because you can see his shirt through the hourglass since it is made of glass. I did toy with the idea of making it like a tinted glass so that way I didn't have to have lines behind it, but decided I just didn't want to go that route because I wanted the focus to be on the sand and it to be easy to see. So I wanted it to have very light colored glass. After all that, I start drawing his shoes. Like most of my hunters, he does have boots on, but for him I put some armor on his toes just to keep the armor going throughout his design, but I didn't want it to overpower, so they are kind of small. And then I just add in his pants and I make the cape a bit longer than I did in the original sketch. So after that, I'm going to go ahead and outline him with that thick line I do with most of my art. And I'm also going to outline the hourglass as a separate object. That way it makes it have a little bit more attention and also separates it from the character. Now that the outline is finished, I can start on the coloring stage. The first step I always do with coloring is to fill in the entire piece with a solid black color. So within the outline I did with the thicker dark line, I will fill it in with generally a color that's dark. The one you see here is a little bit lighter than I usually do, but just whatever will kind of blend in with the lines. Now for this character's color palette, I wanted to keep it similar to the Thayor family, which are my main characters. That's because he is kind of helping them throughout the story a little bit, and he's supposed to be kind of more on the good side rather than like a villain. So because of that, I did pull in the reds from Corbin and a little bit of the, not quite the teal color, it is just blue in this, but a similar color for his cape. For each layer of the hourglass that I fill in with color, I do have to go back and erase it from the hand up to that line art you see. That is because all these layers for the hourglass are above the layers of the actual character. So the line art is going to be underneath the colors as well as the hourglass line art. So for now, I just added in some basic sand color. I might change it later, not 100% sure, because there are specific colors of the sand in the story that are important. But for now, I just wanted to keep it simple. But I did realize it was a little bit bigger than I wanted, so I shrank that down. And then I toyed with the idea of having a chain because this never leaves his side, so I thought, why not put it around his wrist? But it drew too much attention, and so eventually I ended up just putting more of a cord rather than a chain from the top of the hourglass to that band around his wrist. I also ended up changing the color because at first I wanted it gray like metal, but then I ended up wanting it to match the pendant on his cape and his hat just to be a little bit more consistent. After all that, I finally decided I was just going to give him some eyes instead of a cool mask or whatnot. So I sketch out an eye and then I sketch out the basic shape of his face just to help with placement because I wasn't sure since most of it was covered. Then I go over the top with some line art to put it in, and then after I finish up the line art, I'm going to go in and completely remove the shades and fix any parts of the hair that it messes up. I'll fill in his eye color, and then after that I actually go back over his eyes and redraw them slightly different because the ones I originally had, I felt like they were just a little too feminine compared to what I wanted. So then this part I'm just going in and making sure the size is correct since the placement did seem a bit off. So for the color, I actually had the idea that one eye is not enchanted but different, and that is what allows him to like see the enchantment of the hourglass and use it. So I changed the color to be lighter and then split the pupil, and here we are at the end with the final design for Eon.